Hi, my name is Abby and I'm a member of the congregation at St. Paul's Church. So that means that I'm not in any official capacity of the church, other than I help out with the youth work and I'm on the worship team, and I've been lucky enough to do a couple of talks as well for the people who go there. So most of you watching this will probably know who I am, and today I have another opportunity to give a talk, and I'm going to be talking about obedience. Now, for most of us, I would hope that for all of our lives, we've been fairly obedient to the law and to the government, and we've done that without really realizing. Most of us would agree with the principles and the laws that we have in place, and therefore we obey, and we don't really question that. And everyone recently has suddenly had obedience and what the government have had to tell us to do in the forefronts of our minds. With this coronavirus crisis, the restrictions that the government have put in place and the way in which we now live our lives suddenly feels very obedient and very like we have to do exactly what they tell us. And I hope that you agree with me in the sense that actually they're doing that for our benefit. They're doing that for the good of the people who are working on the front line, as well as the good of everybody else. And when we can see that good, when we can see that end goal of being good, obedience doesn't become something that we fear. Because we think actually we know that whilst we have to do this now, it's something good in the long run. And yet, when we use the term obedience within faith and when we relate it to God, I think for many people that becomes the block between them and why they have a relationship with God. They see being a Christian as a religion where you have a set of rules that you have to follow, and obedience is the one thing that they don't want to do. They live in a democracy, they live in a free country where they can do what they want, think what they want. And therefore, why should they conform to something where they suddenly have to obey rules that they don't want to? And it often leads to fear and reluctancy. They don't want to. There's a real reluctancy. They might think that that's unjust, that they have to suddenly do that with their lives. And they view obedience as limitation, as restriction, as something negative, and something that can't have any possibility of being positive within a faith. And even as Christians, I think many of us struggle with that sometimes. We struggle with the idea that we have to obey something. But actually, that's because we base our view of obedience on the world as power, as greed, as chasing after things, as conformity out of fear. But actually, obedience to God is not like that at all. Obedience to God should be our natural response and our longing because we see who He really is. When we see the truth of the character of who our God is, obedience doesn't become something that we should turn away from, but instead it should be our great longing to do. With that, our obedience leads us closer to Him. And within our faith, our obedience doesn't always mean that we know what's going to happen next. God doesn't always say, right, Abby, this is the next move. If you follow me here, you know what's going to happen. Actually, a lot of the time, our obedience comes out of the trust and the faith that no matter what we go through, if God is leading the way, then we are protected. We are safe because He is there. And we're not restricted. And we don't have this obligation to serve Him because we want to do it, because we're in love with what He's done for us. When Jesus is at the center of what we do, our obedience becomes natural, and we know that He will always lead us into a place where He is there. Now in Psalm 119, that's the longest book in the Bible, and if you've ever read it, you sort of have to break it down into sections, and it's account after account after account of people just singing their praises to God. They say, God, you are faithful. God, you are truth. You are life. You are wise. You are loving. You are creator. You are hope. You are strength. You are good. You are faithful. And after they have this declaration of who God is, there's this immediate follow of saying, God, I cried out to you when I was at my weakest. And I followed what you told me to do. It was my joy to do that, and it's still my joy to do that now. These Psalms are personal accounts of how obedience to God can lead us into a better place than we find ourselves in, of how it should be our joy to serve Him, because he is faithful, because he is loving, because he is hope, strength, wisdom, and because he is living. They see obedience not as restrictive, but as freedom. And as Christians, that is who our God is. When we give our lives to him, when we give the control to him, we're not suddenly subject and now in the puppet master's hands. We find freedom that we could never find without him. And along the way, obedience might be really hard. It might be something that we really struggle with, and even though we know those truths, it might be something that we still feel reluctant to do. But actually, in all of that, the truth is that he is for us. Whether we feel it or not, he is for us. And therefore, in obedience, he can never be against us. If we choose to follow him, he will never lead us to a place where he is not there. We find safety, we find freedom, because he won't let us down. He is the living God, and in Psalm 119 we are reminded that it's not just him that's living, but the word that is living. And the commands that he gives from the start of the Bible right the way to the end are living, they are present, they are for now, as well as for the time in which they were written down. Therefore, what we read about his character, his power, his might, all of those things, his faithfulness, is still now. God's word is living, God is living. Therefore, what we read in the Bible is our continual reminder that those things are here right now. They are true right now for us. And if we don't think that he is worthy of our obedience, we don't think that he loves us, we don't think that he is a good God, then we have just had Easter Sunday. We have just seen the miracle of all miracles, the love of all love, the triumph of all triumph, where he died so that we might be set free, and then rose again so that for eternity we never have to be alone. He loves us that much, and therefore he is worthy of our praise. Obedience doesn't stop when the waters rise, because God's love doesn't stop when the waters rise. He longs to take us into beautiful intimacy with him, into an amazing adventure with him. And we need to be bold enough in a world that screams out to do its own thing, to be bold enough to commit our lives to something. And that thing is Jesus. It's obedience to Christ. It's surrender to him, not because he will restrict us, not because of rules and limitation, but because trusting in him and honouring him means that with every step he guides us. With every step we're reminded of his love. We are obedient to him because he was obedient to the cross, and in that showed us his eternal love for us. Our obedience reminds us that he is good, he is worth it, and he is God.